This beautiful little beach is down in the far southeastern corner of Victoria, and it's certainly a birdie spot. There are pelicans out on the sandbanks and nesting terns and waders of all kinds, and the bush is full of birds. The main bird that I've come down to see is or at least to try and find, is the white-breasted sea eagle, a magnificent bird, and nests up in the hills not far from the coast. And I think on the way we should find all sorts of creatures to look at as we go along. Above the beach, on the cliff top, are the beautiful twisted shapes of the wind-torn banksias and tea tree. And here is what to me is certainly the prettiest bird of prey in the whole of Australia. This is the black-shouldered kite. A lovely dove grey on the back and pure white underneath, apart from its black wing patches. They have a ruby red eye and, surprisingly enough, rather long black eyelashes. Most unusual in a bird. Notice how it's hovering quite differently from a kestrel. It has to really work quite hard with those wings. Glides off, shakes its tail into a neat shape after all that fanning and working with it. Really a delightful little bird. Wingspan about 3 feet. Moving back from the coast now into the forest on the beautiful black mare called Star. A very pleasant companion on a jaunt like this. Oh, now here's another kite, rather larger than one we've just been looking at. This is the whistling eagle, but more properly should be called the whistling kite. Like most kites, it's a scavenger and spends its time, as you can see, gliding up and down, looking for dead fish, rabbits, anything of that nature, fulfilling its function as a cleaner-up of the forest and the foreshore. See those very fingered primaries spread out there at the end, working as aerodynamic slots to enable the bird to fly very slowly without stalling. Gradually the forest changes as you penetrate inland, becomes thicker and a more rainforest type of vegetation takes over, and I've left Star to penetrate on foot and see what I can find. There's a young blue wren, a few days out of the nest. Very perky little chap. Very handsome birds, the blue wrens, little blue and black jewels hopping through the tangles of undergrowth. There's moss and lichen of all sorts on the tree trunks. Bush birds singing richly in the background. It almost becomes a jungle as you really penetrate. The sort of place where you find golden whistlers, fantails and yellow robins and all the birds of the tangled underbrush. One of the larger birds is the lyrebird. And they spend a lot of time amongst the mossy logs, raking through with their great feet and looking for insects. There's an interesting relationship between the lyrebird and the yellow robin. You often find the smaller bird following the larger. picking up the scraps that it's left behind. Now here's a yellow robin on its nest, one of the very beautiful nests of the bird world, all decorated with pieces of paper bark and lichen. Here's a grey fantail perched on an old disused fence in the forest, aptly known as the cranky fan from its extraordinarily gyrating flight. And here's its nest. It builds a very strange nest. It's shaped rather like a wine glass with a long stem hanging off the bottom. And the general theory seems to be that it's to drain the water off. Though why this bird should need it and not others is hard to say. And they lay 2 or 3 very pale salmon pink eggs. They're a very pretty little bird. In the deeper, wetter forest, well in from the coast, the satin bowerbirds are nesting, and the male bird in the spring builds a beautiful bower in which he courts his speckled female. And just in a small clearing over this log here, there's one of these bowers. Here is the male bird working on the bough in his dark, glossy blue plumage. A very handsome creature. And this is the female, olive brown and speckled, watching from the tree above. On the ground all around the male bird scatters objects, and these can be quite extraordinary in their range. I've found blue bags and biro pens, pieces of plastic, blue ribbon, blue bus tickets, old matchboxes. Anything that's blue that the bird can pick up, it will bring in from a radius of up to 5 miles around. He works very hard, the male, on the bower. He builds it entirely on his own. It has nothing to do with the nest. He spends a lot of time decorating, rearranging the twigs, and even painting it. You can see him now painting it with a mixture of saliva and sap that he chews up in its bill. There's the female being tempted in a little closer. All the courtship display goes on in the bower. And until the female is tempted down to the bower, there's not much of a relationship set up. Here she comes. He's hopped into the bower and he's displaying and flicking his wings at her as he hops about. And all through this there's a strange calling goes on from the males, churring and clicking and whirring sounds. Quite unbird-like sounds. Look at her beautiful speckled breast. You see those powerful legs. Bird spends a lot of time on the ground and has developed long, strong legs. That remarkable eye. It's a bright but pale china blue. It looks very weird in this dark blue head. He's almost grotesque, isn't he? Here's a closer look at the bower, a really remarkable piece of bird architecture, built up entirely of twigs on a piece of flat ground. Absolutely lovely thing. Heading out of the forest now into more open country and down onto the beach and back to the sunshine and a sense of freedom after the constriction of the deep, dark forest. It's a nice change of scene out in the light and the sunshine. Just up the beach here on the sandbar, there's a great flock of crested terns nesting, which is well worth having a look at. These lonely beaches and sandbars are very seldom visited by man. Consequently, the birds are never disturbed and never molested, and surprising how confiding some of them are. This is a pied oyster catcher. And here's a female red-capped dotterel feeding amongst the weed. A red-necked stint running in for something. Very dapper little bird. Old pied oyster catcher again, one of the familiar sights along the beach. The sandbars are crowded with birds of all kinds. The shallow water is what is attracting them. The whole area is an ideal feeding ground for the swans and the waders of various kinds, and as you can see, the flocks of pelicans. They're very weird birds. Looks like some kind of slow progress of dignitaries of some kind, invented by Lewis Carroll. Now here's an interesting thing. I've never noticed it before, but the pelicans, when they're taking off, they hop across the water. Most larger birds that do have trouble taking off run. The swans do and albatross do. As you can see, these birds are using both feet together. A very strange sort of an action. The pelican is quite closely related to the gannet, surprisingly enough. And it's rather given away in their flight, the technique of the few flaps and then a long glide, flapping and gliding, line astern over the shallow water. They move about all day in the shallows, fishing various areas. Quite extraordinary to see so large a bird in the air. They are, in fact, Australia's largest flying bird. All settling into their new spot. That's a beautiful sight. Wild, sad honking as they take off. These strange objects, looking like some kind of weed, are in fact the floats on a fishing net. I'm out with these two fishermen in the hopes of seeing the pelicans at very close quarters. I believe that sometimes they do come in and actually take the fish from around the net. The pelicans aren't playing the game today and really aren't coming close at all. Now here are the birds that I've really come out to see on the sand spit. A small but extraordinarily lively colony of crested terns. Most remarkable sight, and the sound was even more extraordinary. Shrill, screaming, raucous cries. It was almost frightening. Rather like Daphne du Maurier's birds, you feel that they're taking over. The nesting is in full swing here, and the ground is absolutely littered with young birds and eggs. One has to be very careful where one treads. And here's a young one just hatched out. And another, still weak from struggling out from the shell. Really is hatching day at the nursery. As you can see, they're speckled and marked rather like the eggs. And this is for camouflage. What a sight. All that life. And quite a few gulls nesting amongst. There's one in the foreground there, and another. And I think this is partly why the terns are so anxious about their eggs, because the silver gulls will very smartly step in there and break them open for the delectable insides. Turning inland again now in search of the sea eagle. When looking for large predatory birds of this kind, it's often as useful to look on the ground as up in the sky. There are all kinds of clues. Bird droppings, pieces of fish and other offal brought inland by the birds. And here's the eagle now. An enormous bird just above the treetops. See that great spread of wing? They're about 7 feet across and very broad in proportion. A magnificent creature. Subtly coloured, blackish grey and white. The clues lead further inland into the thick forest up on the hillside. There she is again. If it is she, it's hard to tell the sexes apart when they're not flying together. The female is discernible by being larger. They're both exactly the same colour. She's undoubtedly over her territory, very interested in this marauder on horseback down below. The leaning trunk of this old bloodwood is a feeding platform for the sea eagles. And I noticed on the ground here there are lots of scraps left over from the fish and birds and things that they've been bringing in, so I'll get down and have a closer look at them. There are all sorts of dried up goodies here. The porcupine fish, a couple of those. As you can see, they're not much meat on them. They're all spikes and skin. They usually just eat the tongue and the eyes. Dried up skin of an unfortunate leather jacket. A few bird bones, various sorts. Oh, that's interesting. Looks like an eel. You can see his little plate of teeth there. Cormorant feathers. Probably the pickings here of some weeks of feeding up in the tree above. Having found the feeding tree, I would think that it shouldn't be long before I come on the nest. It should be within half a mile or so. So we'll go and have a closer look through the bush. In contrast to the wet forest where the bowerbirds were building their playground, the forest up here in the hillsides is much drier and rather harsher. Stringy bark nestmate and trees of that nature. As you can see, the scrub's getting pretty thick, so I'll leave Star now and go in on foot and look for the eagle. Looking for the eagle is a rather drawn-out stalking game, really. clues, catching the odd glimpse. And here she is. I keep calling it she. I'm identifying the female with the nest, I think. This one certainly looks large enough to be the female. Extraordinary spread of wing, that great lift and hardly a flap. All that area supporting the weight of the body. The eagle is really hanging about now, and I must surely be approaching the nesting area. These large, tall trees here on the hillside are the perfect site for an eagle's nest. I would say she'd be circling her absolute local territory at this stage. See how low it's coming. Almost brushing the tops of the trees. And here it is. At the head of a gully, looking out over the wide arm of the salt water that runs in under the hill. A beautiful spot for a beautiful bird and a very impressive nest. They add to the nest year after year, and in the end, after sometimes 6 or 7 years, the pile of sticks is an absolute dray load. And I found eagles' nests that it's quite possible to get up and walk about on. Here's one of them, cruising over the arm of the lake under their hillside nest. A pair of them hunting. Each day at certain times the mullet cruise up and down the arm of water here, and it's on these that the eagle is feeding. Here she comes. There, the splash of the fish there. Banking in its own length and back for another try. See those great talons strike out. She's missed again. Actually, I think this is the male, judging by the size. Flying up into the sun. Down go those legs, and it's got the fish. It's got a mullet, an enormous mullet. See that struggle to lift off from the surface. It really needs those broad wings. There's a clue there as to why it should have such a wingspan and such a wing spread. And so beautiful, we'll have another slower look at it. See it banking there. Snap go the legs. Beautiful the way the back feathers lift in the updraft. working hard at keeping itself in a tight circle. Round it comes again. Now watch closely and you'll see those talons go down and plunge into the back of the fish. Oh. Really makes you feel for the poor old mullet. Lifting off back to its perch tree. Flying slowly and rather heavily with that great load. Parachuting upwards, as it were, onto its branch. Isn't that beautiful? Now here comes the female coming in for its attack. Half stalls in midair, spots of fish. Fish is diving upstream. Down it goes. Oh, a terrifying sight. And it's caught one. And lifting off with it. Shakes itself clear of the water. And it too goes back to its perching tree and what looks to me like a well-earned breakfast.